Cancer would be the fourth house, because the fourth house, the sign Cancer is the fourth sign in the zodiac. And so therefore it's associated with the fourth house. So when we talk about the fourth house, as I mentioned in the intro for this episode, I talked about how these water houses tend to cover things that we don't see, or things that people don't see about us. So, for instance, the planets that are in your fourth house may represent things that people don't see that much. Right? I'll give you an example. The sun, which represents your personality, right? So the sun represents your personality, and that's the sign that most people are referencing when you ask someone what's your sign, they give you a sign. It's usually the sun sign, quote unquote. So since the sun represents your personality, that's pretty much, I guess you could say, who you are or how people identify you, so on and so forth. So if a person has their sun in the fourth house, you may find that they are a difficult person to get to know. And if your sun is in your fourth house, you may hear people say a lot that they don't know you. And that's because it's like the fourth house is actually, if you have your will or you've seen a will, taking a look at the charts and the wills of the people that I spotlight in this season, you will see the fourth house is the very bottom of your chart. And because it's at the very bottom, it tends to represent things that are closer to you, closer to home. It actually represents home. And it is an area that people don't always necessarily see. So for you to have your sun or your personality in the fourth house, you probably are a person who does not open up to a lot of people. And I guess when you think about it, it's almost like having sun in Cancer. Even if your sun really isn't in Cancer, your sun could be in Sagittarius. If your sun in your chart is in the fourth house in Sagittarius, you still might be someone that people don't necessarily feel like they know. I hope that makes sense. So the fourth house, very bottom of your chart, tends to signify your home life. It represents family. It could be the family you grew up with, the family you have created. We talked about the fifth house representing children. Fourth house represents family. So it could be your parents, but it could also be the children that you've created. Side note here, when I am timing things like events, and if children are in the picture, usually when I look at a person's chart and I start researching if they had children, a lot of times the fourth house is somehow active when a person is expanding their family. The fourth house represents security. So security is an interesting word. I would say the fourth house tends to represent all sorts of security. Security as in emotional security, how you feel, whether you feel secure in your situation as it is, maybe your home life or your physical home or your family home, the home that you have, I guess you could say that you have with other people, because you can feel at home with other people. As a matter of fact, if you are with someone, whether you're dating them or you're possibly married to them, if they have planets that fall in your fourth house, you might find that you and they feel at home together. And so therein lies the security part. So there's the security in the people that you're around, the security in your physical home, knowing that you have a place to come home to after work or wherever you are. You just believe that place is there. Emotional security, feeling secure and stable within yourself. That's the part that people don't always see. If a person is insecure, you may not always see it. Sometimes, depending on their actions, you might suspect it. But very rarely do people actually acknowledge that they feel insecure. There are a lot of people that will prefer not to. And then there's the security of finances. Because even though the fourth house is technically not a money house, it does represent security from a financial standpoint as well. I mean, remember I just mentioned that the fourth house represents home. Home, it also represents the physical home. So real estate falls here as well. Represents things in the early life, all those things that you hold dear and close to you, as I said before, that you may not necessarily share with other people. Oh, and by the way, the fourth house, I want to mention this. I don't want to forget to say this. The fourth house also represents the latter part of your life. So by the latter part of your life, I would say maybe around 40s and up. And the reason why this is relevant for me in my experience as well, as far as looking at people's charts, is sometimes you will find that, I don't know, maybe you've noticed this, but there are some things that some people don't experience early. I'll give you an example. There are some people that have children really early in life, right? Some people have had children at 22, 20, maybe even 15 years old, right? But there are some people that don't have children until they are like 44, 45 years old. If you looked in a person's chart, their chart would probably suggest that they were going to have to wait that long to have children. And I'll give you a literal example. Halle Berry, for instance. When I looked at her chart, I noticed that the planet that rules her fifth house, and remember, I spoke earlier about how the fifth house rules children, right? So the planet that rules her fifth house actually falls in her fourth house. So I just said that the fourth house rules the latter part of life. Those of you that know Halle know that she didn't start having children until she was in her 40s. That's just to give you an example of how that can work out. So sometimes there are certain things that seem to be promised in the birth chart at a later date. And sometimes it can show up in that way.